This is the final part of Professor Krosinski's journal, adapted into a short story, read by Anna and Mia, edited by AKS. The 24th of November 1998, I have been taken away. I remember only parts of the last few weeks as I've been put under heavy medication. The doctors tell me my friend arrived just in time to save me. He forced the door in and saw me standing on the railing. He rushed and pulled me down. They say I kicked and screamed, causing some painful bruises to my rescuer, and offered a surprising amount of resistance despite my failing physical condition. Eventually, however, he got the better of me and called the authorities. The 29th of November, 1998. As it seems I'm not getting out soon, I might as well start making acquaintances with other occupants of the ward. We are kept in isolation for most of the time, however, so the contact we're allowed to have is limited to the communal leisure times and the few walks we're given each week at the ward's inner yard. There's not much to do around here except to write and focus on getting better with the aid of medication and regular counseling sessions. I miss my radio. There's one at the doctor's lounge, but we aren't allowed to enter. I asked for permission and was laughed at by the head physician. Perhaps I shouldn't inquire of such luxurious things. I just wish there was something more to do as days feel long. Time seems to stretch and thin in this place. I'm not sure whether it's something innate about the place or plain subjective, mere side effects of medication. Whichever the case, the feeling's very real. P.S. I wonder what happened to the portal. My friend hasn't visited me, so I haven't had a chance to ask. December 9th, 1998. My good friend still hasn't visited. Perhaps he doesn't bear to see his old friend in such a miserable condition. The doctors refuse to speak of him. I wonder the reason for this, although it is understandable. I wish I could write to him, but the doctors refuse my letters. No outside connection, they say. I wonder if it's them preventing my friend from visiting. Well, there's nothing I can do about it if that's the case. I can only hope they have my sincere well-being in mind. The other occupants of the ward have proven a disappointment. Most of them are simple half-wits, suffering of various mental illnesses that I care not name. Coupled with heavy dosage of medication, they make poor company for conversation. The only reason I've been able to write my thoughts out with such relative clarity is that I've been discarding some of the medication given, taking only quarter dosages when possible. I shall continue this practice as the medication seems to only dull the mind, but fix nothing of the underlying issues. The counseling is of little help either. The doctors simply lack understanding, being the mindless automatons as they are, often more interested in mental anomalies the patients or maybe external forces press on this place. The 21st of December, 1998. Our facility received a new psychologist last week. I wouldn't be writing of such an insignificant event otherwise, but this new individual is taking an unusual interest in me. A young and naive girl, she's obviously fresh from the school and eager to take on a particularly difficult case to prove herself. She mentioned that she views my situation with particular interest, even though I can hardly tell why, as there's nothing important nor interesting about me. I'm just one soulless automaton in a universe full of soulless automatons. Her interest is madness, like observing a sea of squirming rats, then picking one up and declaring she finds this one of particular interest. Perhaps she'll be of some use to me, however. If I manage to get her trust, I might be able to get cigarettes via her, or perhaps even access to the radio. At the very least, this will serve as a useful distraction, as the days here feel endless with the utter boredom and repetition of activities. So far, we've had only a handful of sessions, though. I'll look forward to conversing with her further. January 1st, 1999. A new year which, of course, will not bring anything new. I've been having some interesting discussions with the new psychologist, although our conversations tend to follow the same trend every time. She insisting that she'll be able to help me if I just help her understand the underlying condition plaguing me, and I hold my silence, only smiling at her youthful naivete. If only you could outline the issues, or give some indication how your life was like, or maybe your past, anything, she always says. I'm not sure she follows the standard procedure, as I'm quite sure she shouldn't be asking such direct questions so early on, but build trust with simple, gentle mannerisms. But then again, she's different from the other automatons. More straightforward, intelligent, a scientifically minded problem solver. A bit like I used to be. There's no way to make her understand, of course. This fact is not just a matter of opinion. It is a metaphysical impossibility, a paradox in on itself, like dividing by zero. The answer is undefined, unanswerable by its very nature. Just as every being is locked within their subjective sense of self, irrevocably separated from the objective reality and unreachable by other subjective observers, so is my case impossible to solve. I almost pity her, for she has ambition, a mind of an engineer, unafraid of a difficult problem. This time, I fear, she's picked something too big to handle. Perhaps I can get my radio and afterwards be able to persuade her to look to further her career elsewhere. The 14th of February, 1999. I haven't written much in the past month. I've been absorbed in this new little problem of mine. I have gotten her trust with, well, I promised to reveal something of my life in exchange for the radio. I've gotten a fair bit of cigarettes already, but they are of little importance. The radio is what I want, and she's showing a surprising amount of resistance. I must admit that I underestimated her. This changes nothing, of course. A few feints, a handful of breadcrumbs of false hope, and she'll think she's gotten the better of me and will deliver the radio, thinking I'll be willing to part with the information needed. I don't suppose it matters any more if I make her see things as they are by explaining my affliction. Maybe she'll be able to handle it and continue unshattered. If not, she shall perish like the rest of the mindless automatons when they witness the truth of being. Only time will tell. It would be a pity if this happens, though, as I'd be left alone again, surrounded by the dulled and the arrogant. The 18th of March, 1999. I finally got the radio. It took a long while, longer than I expected, but she yielded at last. For a long time she kept stalling, trying to pry the information with deceiving tricks, giving poor excuses like, "It'll be hard persuading the head physician," or, "Maybe if you told me something beforehand?" I saw through all these attempts, of course, and kept my ground. Although she did attempt an interesting tactic earlier this month when she vanished for 2 weeks without a singular word. One day I just couldn't find her anywhere in the facility. The other caretakers refused to talk about her, saying only that she'd taken a leave and that it'd be uncertain if she would return at all. All this was a ploy, of course, a poor attempt of infecting me with a feeling of uncertainty while making use of the bond we'd been forming these past few months. Well, naturally it failed, as no such bond never even existed. I had nearly forgotten about her when she suddenly reappeared one day like nothing. She never spoke of her absence, and I saw no reason to inquire about it, as I already knew its purpose. She managed to hold a veneer of normality within her that nevertheless leaked a hint of concealed frustration. A well-constructed facade, yet visible enough so that a trained eye like mine was able to detect it. It was funny, in a way, as she hinted with this little trick of hers that she genuinely might be invested in helping me. I fear she's taking this trivial game a bit too seriously. One shouldn't gamble all her career on an already failed case, after all. The 26th of April, 1999. Time seems to pass much faster now. I only now realize that I haven't written anything in over a month. Perhaps it's the fascinating conversations we've been having. Well, more like games, as they can hardly be called conversations. I did keep my part, of course. I revealed something of my past as promised. Initially she listened with great interest, but grew bored as soon as she saw that I was simply stalling her. Everything I told was true, of course, but completely unrelated. A fine amalgamation of pointless information, if I say so myself. I told everything of my childhood. The stereotypical section of one's life I knew she'd be particularly interested in. Anyway, after hearing it all, she simply declared, "Is that it?" I nodded and lit a cigarette, which annoyed her further. She couldn't think of anything to say. only closed her little notebook and announced that I was free to go. A petty victory, but a victory nonetheless. I got my radio and she got her information. I've been listening to the radio with the most intent ear the past month, yet there's no sign of hidden messages. The beings stay quiet, and I haven't seen or heard any primordial dreams either. Since I was dragged inside the ward, my nightly dreams have been, in general, the most uninteresting. A side effect of the medication, I suppose. May 6th, 1999. Another month has passed by. I promised to myself I'd write more often, but I've been finding it increasingly difficult as, well, the female psychologist I've been playing with had a nervous breakdown of sorts. She took another leave short after our latest discussion, but then returned abruptly, relaying an order via a messenger for me to go speak with her as soon as possible. I arrived at her office and noticed right away that her physical condition had deteriorated significantly. Her head down, resting against her hands, hair all over the face in dry, swirled curves, swaying everywhere as if being moved by a charged electric field. I stood there for a moment and lit a cigarette, wondering the reason for this sudden change. I expected her to reprimand me of the cigarette as she usually does, but this time she mentioned nothing of it, only glanced up and declared,
"Please have a seat."
I complied in silence, and continued with my observation. Her usually youthful, sparkling eyes were replaced with that of a wizened hag, their innate beauty long since vanished into blank existential depths. I thought of asking something, but then decided it better to wait. I didn't need idle for long as she sighed and began.
"You win. I yield. You've won. But you're not so smart as you think you are. I know you've been doing this the whole time. You think this is just some kind of game for you? Your whole well-being, all the plans we've been making. It's all utterly irrelevant to you, isn't it?"
I was at loss as to what to say, as I had expected all this to have been obvious from the beginning. I wondered on this for a second, then realized I had forgotten her immature age and innate naivety such youthful arrogance possesses. I smiled and stated, truthfully, sincerely for the first time, "Wasn't that obvious?" There was something shifting beneath her face, a twitch in the muscles that betrayed how she struggled to keep all the emotions in control. I shook my head. I knew this would happen, but she refused to listen, and I was forced to comply, simply taking advantage of her insistence. She sighed again, rubbed her face with both hands, and uttered words out.
"What do you want? What do you really want? No more games. Just tell me what's with you. I know you know. You're not like the rest of these patients who have legitimate mental issues. Psychosomatic, I mean, something that can be treated with proper medication and counseling. But you... She stopped and started crying, the facade of steadiness finally crumbling into nothingness. I smoked my cigarette and listened to her sobs. I felt nothing. No victory, no sadness. This was a simple inevitability. It was like seeing someone trying to climb Mount Everest in a wheelchair, then break down in tears upon seeing the task insurmountable. I said, "I told you, but you won't listen." She slammed her fist onto the wooden desk and shouted, "Told me what? Told me what? You haven't told me anything. That drivel about your childhood. Just irrelevant bullshit."
I was quite confident that she had passed the line of professional conduct by now, and if I were to report her, she'd get kicked out of the facility. But I doubt she cared of such things any longer. I answered, "Well, yes, I might as well admit that now, although they were bullshit, as you put it, they were true nevertheless, and do not change the facts about my underlying condition." She stared at me with all the furious intent her cute face could muster, fists still resting on the desk.
"What facts of what underlying condition?"
It was my turn to sigh. I took a puff of smoke from the cigarette, which was running short now. My head was beginning to hurt. Perhaps this was just another ploy, another carefully constructed trick to get me to reveal my thoughts. If that was the case, she must have been the greatest actor and deceiver known to man. I thought for a moment and came to the conclusion that for this performance I was willing to part with my thoughts. Ultimately, it didn't matter if her intentions were genuine or not. I stummed the cigarette to the ashtray on the desk and clapped my hands slowly. Bravo! A truly respectable spectacle, a performance of such magnitude that any audience would be impressed. As you keep insisting, I might as well tell you, but as I've mentioned multiple times, the condition afflicting me is incurable by its very nature, for it stems from the very core of being. You see, it is the subjective sense of I itself that is in the essence of issue at hand. She let out a gasp, as if she'd been holding her breath this whole time. I think I saw a slight smile on the corner of her mouth, but I cannot be sure whether it was a smile of contempt or genuine joy. I continued as she stared motionless. I could go into further detail, but I think I shall be brief, as the reasons for the awakening into this condition are of little importance. What's important is that it is real. The consequences of it cannot be denied. You can trust me that I've tried. I thought how to continue and took puffs of smoke from my newly lit cigarette. She kept staring at me with the most intense gaze, no doubt pleased with herself, seeing that her little act had borne fruit. I know not how versed you're in philosophy of the mind. I assume you have at least some knowledge, being a psychologist after all. But whatever the case, I'll try to keep this simple. I take it you're familiar with the distinction in subjective and objective, the very least. Well, consider the subjective observer a kind of bubble of consciousness, floating amidst an objective reality. Although whatever this objective reality in actuality consists of, is of not much relevance here. This subjective observer has been brought into the objective reality as a conscious being by the hidden universal movers of the cosmos, so to say. These concealed puppeteers force the entity, the subjective observer, that is, to act in a certain manner. I stopped for a moment and adjusted my position in the chair. Reciting this all felt like telling of some distant memory, a life lived by some other being. The ultimate movers dictate every move, every action, steer the course of existence itself with the aid of time, or more precisely, becoming, while the subject can have no real say for these forces. Fortunately, most of the conscious beings come equipped with a handy set of veils and obfuscations that shield them from witnessing this ultimate truth. Animals, of course, lacking conscious awareness, have no need for such tools. They conduct themselves happily in nature, being the perfect integrated machines as they are. We, however, are different, or rather think we are. In reality we are not, but are led to believe so with the faux guidance of aforementioned obfuscations. Well, all this is quite obvious though, and not what's my main point. What I'm after, rather, is the essence of the issue, the permanent ailment I suffer, as I mentioned earlier, the subjective sense of I that lies within the core of the artificially constructed sense of self. The illusion of ego, in other words, or one's own relation to it, the relation itself being equally illusory, creating a feedback loop of whole of infinite mirrors. You may wonder, my friend, how I have come into possession of all this knowledge. Well, let me say that once one has witnessed the truth of being itself, there can be no turning back. I have been in places you couldn't comprehend. I have seen vistas that but this is all pointless, for there is no way these things could be mediated via empty words alone. One would have to witness the thing for themselves, see the truth via the most intelligent being. Fortunately, I destroyed it. I burned it all down just so that no one else would have to suffer of this torment. I breathed in smoke and gazed at her shimmering eyes, from which I saw a fellow subjective observer gazing back at what for her was just another automaton existing in an illusory objective reality, forever distanced from her own experience. There was a moment of silence until I concluded this is what's called the true essence of isolation. By now she had taken out her notebook and was now scribbling words with great speed. She then looked up, eyes full of confusion and questions. I doubted she understood any of what I'd said. Perhaps she'd come to understand in time, perhaps not. It mattered little, for as I had explained already, there is no cure for this condition. We sat in silence for some time. I had no idea how much time had passed by now, but it must have been quite a long stretch, as evident by her sudden, shocked expression when she glanced at the clock on her wrist. She said, when looking up, eyes still bewildered,
That's, well, I have to think on this for some time. I will let you know when our next session is.
I nodded and stood up, then turned around and walked out without saying anything more. No more words were needed, as the seeds of truth had been planted on her mind. Only time would tell whether they would begin to fester or be vanished in the winds of remembrance. The 14th of June, 1999. A curious new individual was transferred into the facility recently. I sensed something familiar within him, a fascinating fragrance of companionship, perhaps a soul of my own kind. He seems distant for the moment, not taking anyone into account, only speaking to himself at times, but mostly remaining silent. I might as well observe this individual while my psychologist is on her leave. The 22nd of June, 1999. A beautiful, stoic-looking redhead female visited the kindred soul today. I overheard their discussion, albeit barely. I think she called him Dan. I now know for certain there's something familiar about that man. If only I could establish a link of communication. The female left with hasted steps after their short, awkward discussion, leaving a mist of melancholy in her wake. I wonder what's the story between those two. P.S. I'm sad to say my psychologist is still on her leave. I wonder when she'll return. The 26th of June, 1999. I still haven't seen her. The doctors refuse to talk of her. I fear the worst. The new man called Dan still refuses to speak, and the beings that I used to converse in my apartment stay quiet. I'm alone. Completely alone. The 27th of June, 1999. The kindred soul has had multiple visitors, though they are of ethereal kind, as only he can see them. Are they the beings beyond the portal that used to talk to me? If so, why do they choose to converse with him but not with me? Have I done something wrong? Well, I know I have, but have I done something so wrong that I'm beyond salvation? The 28th of June, 1999. One of the ethereal beings has left a manuscript, a journal of some kind, for the new man to read. He seems immersed in it, absorbing every word with the most furious intent. I must get hold of that journal, somehow. The 28th of June, 1999. Night Addendum. I have been contemplating the events of the past few months. While I am fully aware of the fact that the pure objectivity event that I experienced is incurable, I can't help but wonder whether the effects of it are contagious. Perhaps the seeds of truth have indeed festered in my therapist's mind, and she is now under the same influence. I am aware that none of this matters now, or well, should not matter to me, but I still feel somehow guilty. Perhaps her empathy was sincere. Perhaps she was after something more than simply furthering her career by using me as a stepping ladder. I cannot know. I know I shouldn't have indulged her. She awakened a spark of humanity within me, but as I well knew already, it would be too late. And now she's paying the price, one that should be mine alone to bear. The 29th of June, 1999. I saw her in the cafeteria, dressed in grey patient's clothes. Oh, what have I done? I can hear their laughter, their sinister, malevolent laughter. It was all my fault. Date unknown. Time has lost its meaning along with everything else. It was all a ploy, a trick of such magnitude that no one could have foreseen it, the very least a simpleton like me. I stepped right through the tripwire, and now they're enjoying the consequences of it with such malicious fervor that the unimaginable malignancy of it proves the fact they are beyond this world. I must get that journal somehow. It's my singular remaining hope now. Date unknown. I got the journal, but it was yet another trick. Just one more layer of insanity in this endless web of insanity. They all laugh, everyone around me, above and below. Now, there's nothing remaining except the isolation within, isolation of the subjective sense of self.